Hello again, and welcome back to Truth is Lacking. Today I'm sitting down with a friend of mine, Professor Mike Tricoli. We had an awesome conversation not that long ago, and I wanted to sit down with him and discuss some of these things that we were talking about and how it relates to the scriptures. One of the things I want to remind you, if this channel has been a blessing to you, share this video, pass it along, subscribe to the channel. We look to add more and more content like this in order that it will bolster and boost the Christian perspective, the Christian worldview, but that it will also strengthen the believer to help create an apologetic that you have no need to be ashamed of why you believe what you believe. Today, we're going to talk about our mind and some things to do with psychology, and it's fascinating how much the scriptures actually talk about this and interact with this. One of the things that we're going to discuss here in Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and verse 2 says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. So God is literally saying, you want to worship me more purely? That's going to happen by presenting your body as a living sacrifice. Well, what's entailed with that? That's really full what Paul is saying. And Paul gives a little more clarity here in verse 2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. It's that renewal of mind that Mike and I are going to talk about, because the scripture is full of this renewing of spirit, renewing of heart, renewing of mind. It's something that takes place by the Holy Spirit within the believer's life. But it's awesome when we actually see what happens and what takes place from that perspective. So Mike, if you would, do you mind introducing yourself, kind of giving some of your background, your credentials, and we'll jump into it.
Sure. I'm Mike Tricoli. I began working in the field of psych in 1988, a long time ago. A lot has changed since then, and I'm going to discuss some of that. But I had a degree in psych, a degree in biblical studies as well. Back then, going into the field, I was a mental health counselor, became a nurse, went to nursing school, got my master's degree, and did a lot of work managing behavioral health hospitals, working in the field of psych, running groups, talking to people one-on-one, lots and lots of work, lots of study. Currently working on my doctorate and working as an assistant professor at a university. I teach this stuff.
That's fantastic. So what's cool about this is you don't have just theoretical knowledge from study, which there's a place for that, but a lot of practical application in interacting with patients as well as coworkers as well. That's fantastic. So I guess if you would kind of give us an overarching, concise idea, what is psychology? What is the field of psychology? What is the study of psychology? What is that?
Well, it really boils down to the study of the mind. And it comes down to, how does our mind function? And what are the expected behaviors? Once we learn how the mind functions, expected behaviors, and then our behaviors, how does that affect our mind? And so psych there's a lot to it. You start going to the medical perspectives, it gets very deep. And a lot of people, you lose them at that point. So much of what I focus on is, let's talk about the basics. And psych this is how the mind works, and this is the expected behaviors based on that.
Fantastic. Okay. So as we delve into this and talking about the study of the mind, the limited bits that I know, it's like you already said, it's rather complex and it can get very confusing very, very quickly. But something that I have found in ministry and pastoral type of ministry, folks come, they come to their pastors for counseling, obviously, right? Whether it's marital issues, issues with children or children issues with parents. It's a lot of relational type of counseling. Something's going on either personally in their life or personally with others. And pastoral ministry gets kind of like a crash course in pastoral counseling, but there's not a lot of in-depth stuff that we go into. One of the things you and I had a conversation back about was the way that our mind works. And I was talking to you like, hey, how do our emotions work? Like, how does this actually impact us? Because there was one time, and I'll confessedly say, I used to think emotions were a weakness in life. And clearly, that is a total anti-biblical approach to have, and it's a wrong approach to have. Emotions can greatly expound on life. It benefits life. They're very, very beneficial. However, it seems like in our culture today, we do a whole lot more emotional thinking than we do critical thinking. It seems like critical analytical thinking has gone by the wayside, and now everything is emotional driven. Have you seen that within the years of your profession?
Yeah, we do seem to be moving in that direction. Many of the problems we have in society today is based on people who are not adequately controlling their emotions. The things you mentioned, people going to ministers and asking them, I'm struggling with this, I'm dealing with this, I'm dealing with that. Those are things everybody deals with. There are things we all deal with, and really what it comes down to is, how do we deal with them? How do we effectively deal with the problems we face in life? And now I think the younger generations, and everybody at some level, is really struggling with, how do I control my emotions? How do I use my emotions to effectively function throughout life?
Absolutely, in both in a positive way, but then also be able to reflect and see the negative side if emotions are controlling me. And so it seems like within that, there was something that you went through with me, and you kind of did an illustration of how the mind works and how we get stuck in the middle brain and how it interacts with our front brain. Could you mind going through that for us?
Sure, I'll illustrate it here. There's some real basics here, and it is based on some medical. I'm going to revise things a little bit to make it more understanding, and I will throw out some terms in there, some medical terms, and go over some structures. But I'm going to begin with a drawing of a brain, and I am not a great artist, so spare me that. All right, so we're going to break down the brain into different sections. Okay, and so I'm going to start with the prefrontal cortex here. This is the front brain. We just call it the front brain.
Okay.
All right, and then through here we got the back brain, the rear brain. We have an occipital lobe back here. We have the cerebellum back here. We have the brainstem right here.
Okay.
So this is all the back brain. Through here, we have the midbrain. Okay, and in the midbrain, there's certain structures that we have: the amygdalas, the hippocampuses, pineal gland. We have fight or flight. We have a lot of emotions in there. A lot of emotions, instincts, and passions are right here.
Okay.
In the midbrain.
Okay.
And so it's a very powerful part of our brain, and it does trigger a whole bunch of feelings or chemicals that are based on feelings. And then up here we have the front brain. We have the prefrontal cortex, and this is our intellect, and this is where most of us spend our time and spend most of our time. We have to spend most of our time here. In the front brain, we have 2 + 2 = 4, and we work our way through many of our problems in life with our deductive reasoning, our critical thinking.
Okay.
And so the front brain is where modern man has to spend a lot of time. In the midbrain, our ancestors had to spend a lot of time here, and animals spend a lot of time here. Animals spend a lot of time right through here, and not as much through here. And one of the things that really distinguishes humans from animals is our strength right here. So our ancestors had to spend time here. They had to run from mastodons, saber-toothed tigers. We don't do that anymore unless we're psychotic, and that's a whole different story.
Sure thing.
We don't have to be here as much. Problems occur when we spend a lot of time right here, too much time right here, and we go from where we need to be to here, and something happens there. Now, there's a type of therapy called behavioral therapy.
Okay.
That focuses a lot on this.
Okay.
And it's a behavioral therapy that CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, that has terms throughout, and it does sort of guide us nowadays as to how to be therapeutic with our patients. It began, there's a guy named Aaron Beck, he kind of began this. He was in the 60s. It really took off in the 1960s. It really took off in the 80s, later on, when psych went through a lot of changes. And the DSM-3 revised came out, which is our diagnostic manual.
Okay.
So Aaron Beck turned 100 years old recently. He's still around, and he came with a great bunch of formulas, and a lot of this is based on that, so I need to give him credit.
Okay.
So something happens when we go from the front brain to the midbrain. And now we go from where we need to be, we're making tough decisions in our life, to an area where our emotions are then guiding our behaviors, and really we've become impulsive. And there's a term for that, a CBT term, cognitive behavioral therapy term, called triggers. We're triggered into the midbrain. Once triggered into the midbrain, where our emotions are controlling our behaviors, we have a task now. And now we have to find some way to go back to the part of our brain that helps us think our way through problems, to help us problem solve. And there's another CBT term called coping. That's coping. We get triggered into our midbrain by a certain event or activity, a memory of something that occurred, and now we have to cope with that and go back to the front brain.
So triggers doesn't necessarily imply just an event takes place. It could be a person, correct? So like, because I've seen this with in marriages with spouses, when there's a lot of tension built up in the marriage, it seems like one of the spouses could say something and it just explodes into a very large argument that becomes very destructive. It becomes very attacking on people. So that's what's happening. They're leaving the front part of the brain, the intellectual, the logical side of it. Something triggers them. So these triggers, can these happen, I guess, are these compounding events that kind of take place that produces these triggers that now the slightest thing can trigger?
Yes. In marital marriages, we have themes often. And anybody who's married knows this. There's a certain theme that the spouse goes to that sort of triggers us. And so it may have been a buildup of anxieties throughout a long period of time, and now that one final straw, you're triggered.
That's it.
And you have a problem if your spouse likes to trigger you, okay? Because some people do go out of their way to trigger other people. And then you have to cope. And that individual has to understand, I have been triggered. Now, CBT in its most basic form, this is the way I was trained in 1980s, late 1980s,
okay,
early 1990s,
okay,
is we identify the triggers. We do our best to teach people how to avoid these triggers, how to know your triggers and how to deal with those triggers, how to avoid those triggers. But once triggered, now you have a list of triggers. Once triggered, how do you cope with those triggers?
That I want to land on that, because it seems like I hear, and I'm sure I've even used the excuse as well. Well, it's not my fault. You did such and such. That's why I'm behaving the way that I'm behaving. That's not acceptable scripturally, right? We have to take responsibility for our actions. But you're even saying, psychologically speaking, this is what you're talking about. Identify what's going on, what's causing that trigger, but this is where you have to quickly get to this quick coping side. So how do I do that? How do I get triggered? I see something, it takes place, I'm immediately frustrated, I'm angry, like I'm starting to boil. How do I get out of my middle brain and start focusing here on my frontal brain, be able to think this through?
Well, a lot of it is about understanding ourselves. When I first got into this field, I was 21 years old. I was a kid. And I heard that saying, know yourself. And it was everywhere in psych. And I kind of laughed at it. I'm like, yeah, I know myself. I'm Mike Tricoli. What's the big deal, okay?
Yes.
As I grew older, I started realizing, no, there's something there. There's something there. Understanding who we are. Understanding what makes us happy. What are our weaknesses? What are the things that trigger us to not have control over our own thoughts? And then taking responsibility for that. Now we know to whom much is given, much is expected.
Yes.
And once you understand this, you're responsible for it. And when I accepted that into my world and understanding, no, I have control over things. These are my decisions to allow this to happen once I know my triggers. And then to not get to the point where I cope, well, I've made that decision too. And there's a lot of issues right here. We spend so much time here, sometimes because it's fun to be there. And there's power here, there's energy here, there's the adrenaline here. And some people spend time here because they want to sometimes. And it's not that they want to be triggered, but once they're there, it is so hard to cope that they choose not to.
So I want to ask about that. How do if someone's comfortable there, how do we get there? But there's a couple things you said that I want to ask about. One of the things you said that you were being told, know yourself. And now it's interesting how in the psychology world, it's teaching that concept to know yourself, understand who you are. But the scriptures talk about something as well, that we become a new creature in Christ. So there's an old self is put away, and now this new self is being created that is actually teaching us how to more holistically use the middle brain to benefit the frontal. I guess I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, to benefit this frontal part, that you can enjoy life more and have more deeper relationships, experience much more. Things are fuller at that point. So it's what I guess in it being comfortable here in the middle brain, is this where sexual drive would come from? Is it like this? Because it seems like in our culture, we deal a lot with sexuality. Not that it hasn't been happening through all of humanity's history, but it's being glorified today. And we're having all of this gender dysphoria, all of these different things that are taking place. And it's often contorted around a misplaced sexual identity and sexual attraction. Is that taking place in the middle brain, or is that happening in the front? What's causing that we can figure out how to get from here to here?
A lot of passions, sexual passions are right here.
Okay.
And so there's no question about that. Now, my students often, I notice when I go through this with them, they come out with a misinterpretation of front brain good, midbrain bad. That's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
We need our whole brain
Certainly.
to function at a healthy level. And really the most successful people in the world know how to harness all the power right here, the passions right here with the front brain. And so this is based on MRI studies and looking at EEGs and where is the electrical activity going? And where the electrical activity goes, that's where the blood flows. And where the blood flows, that's the most functional part of the brain. And so they find people are so much more successful that when they're in the midbrain, the front brain lights up too.
Interesting.
So both parts, and the back brain, it all lights up. And the brain works together to help us be successful. Problems occur when they see this is dulled. There's not much activity here, and all the activities here. And the person becomes impulsive, and people say, crazy. And personality disorders spend so much time here and very little time here. Other problems occur when you see this area lighten up, and this area lights up also, but it looks like psychosis. It's chaos. It's not an organized structural system any longer. It's just going haywire. And this is really what's dictating the individual's behaviors.
Interesting. So there's actual scans, these brain scans show pathological movement throughout the whole brain if it's functioning in a healthy manner.
Even healthy people can have difficulties with this.
Okay.
So unhealthy people, and I'm talking about in numerous different types of pathologies, psych pathologies, struggle more than others. But even healthy people can get to the point where they're triggered and they're struggling in here. Now, it can be sexual, it could be any number of things where they're no longer controlling that behavior because they're not here where they need to be. Understanding sex is great within a certain context. We all know that. That's the human condition. We understand that. But when controlled and when under certain circumstances, that's when it's healthy.
So let me ask then, because I think one of the foundational things for me to better understand this, I would very naturally pick up what some of your students were like, okay, stay out of the middle brain. Emotions are a weakness, kind of that thought that I originally had. Go with just the frontal intellectual. That's all that you stay in. Just stay there. This doesn't create good relationships either if we don't include these emotions. So that's something I've really had to learn. My wife has been very long suffering in that. So, but within that, I guess developmentally, as children, how is this developing? How are these things developing, and what can impair or damage to where one starts to take precedence over the other?
A lot of brain studies have been done on children.
Okay.
And they have found that child geniuses spend a lot of time right here, whereas most of the time children are much more midbrained. But child geniuses are here, and they're nurturing that part of their brain.
Okay.
So they're strengthening and exercising that part of their brain into their adult years. And so you'll see a child who age 5 and 6 who have front brain access the way a 25-year-old would.
Interesting.
And that really is what distinguished them from other people. Now, remember, psych, and I'm talking now about CBT, it's about how does the brain affect our behavior.
Yes.
The second part of that is how does our behavior affect our brain? And so athletics, let's look at that for a second.
Yes, absolutely.
My favorite athlete, Michael Jordan, okay? He knows how to harness the power right here, the adrenaline's full force, all the different chemicals that just burst from the midbrain with the front brain. And that is evidenced by his conversations about how everybody during some of the most intense athletic events he's been involved in, everybody's moving in slow motion. And he thinks about every detail of what's going on around him, which means he is fully front-brained while passionately midbrained. Those are successful people. And having that ability to control all parts of your brain like that is such a key to success. And how do we do that? That's the question. How do we do that? Just like Michael Jordan does it, we practice it, we exercise it, we do it over and over and over again, not allowing failures to get in the way of us strengthening our front brain.
So this is something that could actually be strengthened, trained, grown, developed. So this isn't just strictly about how were you developed as a child. Great, you were a healthy family, so you're good to go. And oh, sorry, you're from an unhealthy family, so tough luck, you're never going to make it. This is something that regardless of what your family home was, regardless of what your development was, understanding this is you can grow in this, you can strengthen in this. That's amazing, because that literally, and I want to come to that CBT, because how does my brain control my behavior interact with my brain? Because that goes back to what you said a moment ago. We are to be responsible for our actions. We can't play the victim. We can't say, well, this happened to me, therefore I can be whatever I want, or I can do whatever I want. I have to take responsibility. Apparently I'm capable of doing that psychologically, but even more so for the Christian, we're demanded. It's demanded in Scripture that there is supposed to be this development that is taking place and happening within us. So this is going to naturally begin to take place if we are maturing in Christ. One of the things that we read in Romans 12, that our minds are going to be renewed. So I wonder if that renewal of mind, not that CBT is the renewal of mind, because it's something that the Spirit is doing, but this is almost a technique that is harnessing or recognizing some of this truth that begins to develop within a believer who's pursuing after Christ. So how do I strengthen, how do I develop, how do I strengthen my coping, how do I strengthen my behavior? I guess, where would you start?
There's a number of different types of therapies. Now, for myself, I learned CBT. It was the first thing that we turned to in the late 1980s, 90s, basically 90s, okay, when psych went through a revolution. Basically, we didn't have the time we used to have. And so we had to find some way to do crisis management, because the average stay in a behavioral health hospital went from 3 to 6 months to 1 month, and then rapidly went down to 5 to 7 days, which is where we're at now. So wow, they had to sit down and learn this stuff and say, now we have crisis management. So we can only plant seeds as far as let's teach people the basics, and hopefully they can work from there. Okay. It was in my studies of another type of therapy, more than one type of therapy, but began with dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT. I started being astonished at how much of it I was familiar with already.
Interesting.
Not because of my psych studies, but because of my biblical studies in my younger years.
How interesting is that?
I started going, wait, no, I've heard this stuff before. And DBT is not based on the Bible. It's not based on Scripture. It is science. And it is built off, it's a form of CBT, built off of CBT. And going beyond it, hands-on, understand how do I strengthen my front brain? How do I strengthen the structures that help me strengthen my front brain is the key to really using this.
Wow.
I'll get to that.
Okay, that's amazing. Yeah. Okay. So where would we begin? So I guess let me ask about the hippocampus and the amygdala, and the middle part of the brain. And I could be wrong. Am I correct that the amygdala it's more of our aggression, where adrenaline or something comes from?
Amygdalas, these structures do cause a cascade of stress hormones.
Okay.
And the amygdalas hold memories in there of traumatic experiences, really passionate, powerful, strong experiences. Okay. And so it holds it, especially more recent ones, it holds it, and there's no sense of time in there.
Interesting.
So when it drops into the amygdalas, it needs to be processed. Those memories have to be processed. And the hippocampus, that's its job. The hippocampus is what lay people would refer to as the emotional regulator. And what the hippocampus does is it takes what's going on in here, these numerous memories, which can be anything from someone cut me off on the expressway and I almost crashed my car, to horrendous trauma.
Oh, wow.
And it takes these and moves them forward.
That's the hippocampus job.
Yes.
That's what it's
the
supposed to do. The
emotional regulator is supposed to do these things for it. It holds it, brings it back and forth, sometimes 10, 20, 1,000 times. And it keeps doing this because what it's supposed to be doing is processing these traumas or these emotionally charged experiences with the front brain and resolving them, and in some way giving us a sense of peace related to those traumas. If this doesn't occur, now this is all part of exercising the brain. If this doesn't occur, if there's an individual has difficulty with these, there's a noted decrease or deterioration of the hippocampus.
Really? You can actually pick that up?
There's numerous studies that actually do focus on that.
Interesting.
That the volume of the hippocampus decreases when this is not occurring as it's supposed to. Now, as you can tell, future problem solving, future resolution of trauma becomes very difficult if the hippocampus begins to deteriorate. And when we pull up memories directly from the amygdalas, instead of this process occurring, there's no sense of time, and there's a name for that. It's called PTSD. These are flashbacks. These are individuals who have not resolved this right here. And so the mind is saying, you're going through this again. You're experiencing this right now. So when someone's struggling with trauma, now trauma could be the loss of somebody, it could be any number of things, and they're looking at that experience and they're saying, oh my gosh, it feels like it just happened, or it's happening right now.
It's so fresh.
It's right now. I can't believe
like
it's just still there. That's
it's
because
affecting everything currently,
yes,
even though it happened in the past.
Yes, they're still dealing with this. And they haven't quite gotten to the point where they're able to say, I resolved this. This is not my fault. This is not God's fault. I can't go back in time and change it. I can't do magic and change it. Or they've gotten to the point saying, what I can do is I can grow from this. And I can use this to strengthen myself. And this structure here is supposed to help us with that. And it's supposed to strengthen the front brain. When this begins to deteriorate, this begins to deteriorate. And so it's up to us to determine, how do I make this stronger? How do I get a hippocampus that's so powerful and a front brain that's so powerful that when I'm hit with traumas, which we are all hit with traumas, it's a part of life, I learn to cope. And I'm strong in my coping.
That's amazing. And that's part of that DBT thing that you were saying.
Well, DBT is much more extensive. Now, they're all much more extensive.
Okay.
And so right now I'm really focusing on cognitive behavioral therapy.
It's CBT.
CBT. And if we want to go into DBT, it's a different conversation.
Okay.
And it's about principles. It's about understanding the here and now. It's about understanding moving forward. All of the details related to this comes out in DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy.
Okay.
And it's about, throughout all of this, we're looking for thought abnormalities. We're looking for dysfunctional thinking. When we can see we're not having rational thought here. And the individual is struggling with rational thought because they're right here.
Because they're staying here.
Yes. And they're spending so much time in here. And even though they may present well, and you may see someone who looks like a professional, they look like they're doing well, they're presenting well because they've been practicing this. Behind the scenes, they're raging.
And this can sometimes, a person might give a very good presentation to others, but this will be very often known from people close to them, this raging side that's out of them.
Yes.
Okay, they can be very explosive in their words, their behavior.
Yes.
It can literally come out in rage.
And this person may be comfortable showing some of this to their significant other, to their kids. But in public, they've learned to develop this strength here and showing this.
Literally a two-faced person.
Yeah, when you read DBT, you start going into DBT, you start looking at it. It's all about, okay, now here you are. It's the yin-yang of the human experience. Here you are, presenting yourself to everybody around you.
Interesting.
And here you are back here.
You really are.
Well, you're both.
Okay.
Really, you are both people.
Okay.
You can't present yourself to everybody around you as this person and not be that person at some level. And DBT looks at these things and says, well, there's so much room there for pathologies, for sickness, for destructive behaviors and destructive relationships. The individual has to learn to do this.
Interesting.
So it has to learn to come together and be that person that they're presenting themselves as, which is who they want to be. They need to learn to bridge that gap and then get rid of all that pathological behaviors that are present when they're sitting right here.
So that's huge what you just said, because it's not just a black and white issue. It's not knock that off and be this person. There's so much that's literally going on there in the mind that needs to happen. That therapy needs to take place in order that person that they're projecting to be. And I would say a lot of them, that's really the person that they want to be. They don't want to be controlled here anymore, be constantly triggered where they're, because not a lot of people like being stuck in that turmoil, that constant turmoil. Folks that suffer with PTSD like constantly reliving this, and it's affecting everything. They don't want to stay there.
Yes.
They want to be this whole person. So this is where CBT comes in.
Well, CBT this is a CBT right now, and there's a lot to it. I mean, there's books and books this big written about CBT,
Okay.
and I've got the basics here.
Okay.
So this is at the heart of CBT, and when I was trained how to run groups, how to look for thought abnormalities, how to look for irrational thought, this is what was presented to me, and I'm presenting it. There's so much more, and what you just stated was very interesting, how these individuals don't want to be here. Now, it's not even so much they don't want to be here, they don't want to make their decisions based on what's going on in here, because it is so destructive. They don't want the results of being stuck in here. I'll give you an example of when someone's okay being here. Now, I go to an amusement park, okay?
Okay.
So a few years back,
Okay.
I'm waiting in line to go through a roller coaster.
Okay.
A very intense roller coaster. And I'm going 45 minutes sitting in this line going, what am I doing in this line for 45 minutes to do an 8-minute ride?
Yeah.
I'm having a great midbrain experience. That's what I'm doing. It's a lot of fun. I'm letting loose. I decide I'm going to go through this roller coaster front-brained. I'm going to sit right here. And I'm going to allow myself to intellectualize. I wave to the camera that's at the bottom of the roller coaster. Controlled.
Interesting.
It wasn't as much fun. It's not as much fun. It's an artificial danger we're going through with the roller coaster for the most part. And it is kind of fun just to let loose sometimes, and to just allow ourselves to really enjoy that experience instead of controlling it all here. But the problem is the consequences for that, not with the roller coaster. The roller coaster is a fun way of doing it, a fun way to describe it. And if we can find healthy, fun ways to exercise our midbrain, that's great. But the results of this, spending so much time in here when we need to be here, is destroying relationships, destroying our lives. There's so many chemicals that come out of the midbrain that causes us to have cardiac problems, and of course, mental problems, psychiatric problems, develop all kinds of medical difficulties because we're spending so much time here when we need to calm ourselves down. And being in here, all the chemicals, our blood pressure goes up, our pulse goes up, respirations goes up. We harden our arteries because we stiffen everything about our body. And it is so unhealthy.
So it's a physiological effect through the whole thing.
You can see the physiological effect.
Wow.
So unhealthy to be right here. So unhealthy to sit here in the midbrain for so much of our day, even when we're presenting well and we're spending time in here. There's a lot of people like that in life that are able to present well and then going through different conversations, seem like they're doing well in life, but behind the scenes, if we were to do a brain scan on those individuals, or brain studies individuals, they would see they're here. Even though they look like they're here, they're spending so much time right here, and it's very unhealthy.
So that's a great contrast that you made with Michael Jordan and someone who gets stuck here. Michael Jordan was clearly extremely successful in basketball, so successful that he could take time off to go play baseball and then come back to basketball and still win. Like, it's incredible the amount of talent that he has been given, but
coping with the loss of his father. Michael Jordan knew how to do that. It was not easy for him. He was so close to his father. He retired from basketball, got into baseball. It was his coping. Dad always wanted to be a baseball player. It was almost like he was giving honor to his father.
Wow.
And then going back to basketball. It was his way of coping, and it was fantastically effective.
How amazing.
Well, that is part of what this is about. It's understanding not just our triggers, but our coping. And sometimes coping is based specifically on a specific trigger. So how do I cope with this specific trigger in my life? And how do I cope when I see the trigger occurring so it doesn't send me full-blown into midbrain? And so understanding that. Now there's long-term. Sometimes there's just anxiety reduction, generalized anxiety reduction to help us avoid being triggered.
Okay.
Other times there's just general coping throughout our day, coping things we do to bring ourselves down, to relax our mind throughout our day, even when we're not being triggered by a specific event or memory, just to bring our anxiety level down. So there's all different facets to this. Okay. I can show you a little bit of an anxiety dial if you'd like.
Please, please do. Please do. Because I would definitely say anxiety is probably something that we really struggle with because it can be triggered by so many different types of stresses, right?
Yes, a lot of this does boil down to anxiety. Now, the two disorders that walk hand in hand, anxiety and depression.
Yes.
Anxiety
Yes. Okay.
tends to paralyze us. We get stuck in the midbrain, and the midbrain dictates our behaviors, controls our behaviors, keeps us from being successful when we know we can be successful. When we know that we have the intellectual capacity, we have all the different things we need to be successful, but we can't because there's one thing in the way. But let me show you the anxiety dial.
Yeah.
When that occurs, depression is a natural consequence.
Okay.
But I'm just going to basic dial here.
Okay.
Okay. And so this is something that can be looked at in a broad way or in a very specific way. All right. And many different ways of looking at it. But anxiety dial, everybody has anxiety. When someone says, I have anxiety, my first thought is, okay, so what does that mean? It means different things for different people. This dial helps you get an understanding of, well, what is healthy anxiety? What is unhealthy anxiety? Because over here, we have someone who has anxiety and they're on the healthy part of the scale. Okay. Over here, anxieties become unhealthy. This is a dividing line. And so people spend time over here are much more successful than people who spend time over here. Because over here, you're midbrain. And this is where that tipping point is. Some people spend time right here. Okay, so they're right on the edge. All it takes is one trigger.
And they're over
Yes.
the unhealthy side.
One trigger, and there you are all of a sudden.
One trigger.
Yes, and so individuals like this are walking around edgy. And often, and I'm not trying to in any way disparage people who struggle from PTSD, this is where they're at.
Okay.
They're right there. And that trigger is the flashback, then they go into full-blown midbrain experiences. Generalized anxiety reduction. And what we're talking about is basic things we do in our lives. And we all have these things. Everybody has these things. Everybody has coping mechanisms. Everybody has triggers. Everybody has ways to deal with generalized anxiety. It might be just a hot bath. That they sit down and say, I need a hot bath right now. I need to go to the gym and get a little workout here.
Yeah.
Specific workouts for specific experiences in our lives. I need to just get this type of workout. I really need to go on a bike ride. I need to go swimming.
Something. Okay. Okay.
We do that to do this.
To bring us back down.
To bring us back down. So then when we're triggered, we're still within normal range. We can handle triggers better when we learn how to manage our anxiety in a general way.
So that's where our behavior, what we do in our behaviors, can dramatically help us psychologically.
Yes, yes. Now, when somebody's over here and they're just spending all their time here, these people are really struggling. And they're going to get depression.
Yes.
Depression, you'll see the depression in their lives. And the longer they spend, this is all midbrain over here. The
Okay.
longer they spend sitting there in a part of the world where nothing makes sense. I can't say what I want to say. I can't communicate the way I want to communicate. I can't communicate with people the way I want. I can't relate to people anymore because I'm not thinking straight anymore. Depression is a natural consequence for that.
I've seen this work out, and if I remember correctly, I've heard that antidepressants are like the number one prescribed medication in America, which is kind of it doesn't make a lot of sense when we are also, we can literally almost do anything that we want to do. There's so much freedom that we have within this state. Going to an amusement park, doing something, like, it's amazing how much social activity we can have, yet depression rates still stay so astronomically high. And I've seen this played out in some where they don't interact with people a lot. They stay kind of as a recluse. Their homes are dark. They don't let a lot of light in. Like, it's just, things just kind of, you can tell something's going on because they just kind of shut down. They're kind of isolating themselves from everything. They would rather just stay home and watch TV rather than do anything else, physical, or interact with people, or whatever it is. What do we do, Mike, to get people out of this? Because a lot of Christians struggle with this, where they get in. I know back in my life, I can remember hitting these depressive states where it was hard to get out of these things, out of these just holes. What can we do? It's one thing for the Christian to just say, get your identity in Christ and be new. Like, that cliche, though it's accurate and it's true, there's much more going on. It's not a black and white thing. There's a whole lot of psychological things happening. What can we do to help get from here more to a healthy side?
Well, it's true. People spend time over here will be on antidepressants. That is always the case, almost always the case. If they don't, the depression just seems to deepen. But antidepressants aren't the only answer. And I would throw in anti-anxiety medications in there as well. Anti-anxieties, antidepressants. I believe in the use of this stuff, but over time now, this is a deep, dark secret in psych, and we kind of all know it. Those who've been around for years and years and years, we know the medication dosages have to go higher and higher and higher to get the same effect, unless there are behavioral changes.
Interesting.
So the medications are great, and you'll notice with SSRIs, which are antidepressants, Frontbrain activity increases just with the medication alone. Over time, that effect becomes less and less as the individual begins to acclimate to the medications. The body begins to acclimate. The behaviors don't change. You'll see the Frontbrain activity begin to decrease over time. That individual needs more of this and different ways in their life they can cope and bring their general anxiety down, so the dosages don't have to go higher, or maybe they won't need it at all if they learn to develop some way to control their anxiety and some way to control their depression. A lot of it is triggers, a lot of understanding coping, and there's a lot more beyond that as well. There's books written on this stuff, lots of books, and I'll get into that also in a future video.
That's fantastic. So one of the things as we conclude here, to help reduce anxiety, one of the things that you said was related to physical activity, hot bath. So it's finding something that works for you as an individual, that you know, if it's to sit next to a candle, whatever, an aroma, whether it's a book, like know what works for you to help you.
There are thousands of things out there. I'll give you an example of my own life.
Okay.
At one point, I was managing a hospital. I did this for like 15 years. I worked there 23 years. I managed the entire hospital for at least 15 years, and it was a highly stressful, high anxiety job. People were threatening me with lawsuits every week. I had to lead every code in that hospital. It was extremely difficult environment to work in. I didn't want to take that home with me. All that anxiety, sitting here on the edge. I didn't want to do that.
That wouldn't be too great for family.
No, it was not. I mean, it's one of those things where effective interpersonal relationships is not there if you drive home under those circumstances. So I had this place on the left-hand side of the road, driving home. This is in Illinois where I used to live.
Okay.
On the left-hand side of the road was a frozen yogurt place. And when I could feel my tension real high, driving down the road, I'd say, I'm going to stop by and have my cup of frozen yogurt. Just sit down and relax and actively and knowingly and mindfully go Frontbrain. Knowing I'm doing that is so helpful, because we're conscious of our behaviors, conscious of our anxiety reduction techniques, our coping techniques, and we're exercising them and practicing them. And I would sit there and purposely say, I'm going to relax right now. I'm going to bring my blood pressure down. I'm going to bring my pulse down. I'm going to allow myself to go back Frontbrain, sitting here eating my frozen yogurt. Frozen yogurt's not a miracle drug, okay? This is not magic. This is me understanding myself. This is me knowing myself, and that's a challenge we all have.
So I like how you said there's an intentionality to it. You can't just sit back and just hope it magically happens. You have to be intentional, know something that helps you, and intentionally work through that, so that you're not bringing this stuff home and negatively impacting the ones that you love the most, your family.
That's for everybody. That's not just people who have pathologies. Everybody needs to learn to do that stuff.
Amen. Well, Professor Tricoli, this has been fantastic. We'll end here. I definitely want to continue on more. This was a whole lot to take on.
Yes.
If this has been encouraging for you and giving some clarity and some understanding, I encourage you to look for some other videos that we're going to have as we work through some of these process. What's amazing is God has wired us incredibly, and the part of this being made in the image of God, it would make sense that we would be very complex individuals. We would be very complex as humans, and just some of the stuff that we've gone through is just casting a glimpse into how complex our minds actually are. I encourage you, share this with somebody if you think it would help them. I hope it's been a blessing to you. If there's something in particular that you would also love to see us cover or go through, put it down there in the comments and let us know, because we would love to cover issues that would specifically help you in your walk, help you individually, and more importantly, to help others in following after Christ. God bless you.